So as it is 12 o'clock, let's make a start. I can see that you're all on mute, so thank you very much for that. So if you have got any questions when I am demonstrating today's project, if you want to use the chat box, that would be great. And as soon as I see your question pop up, I will respond. But failing that, if you're able to stay a little bit longer after I've done the recorded part of the class, we can have a proper chat later. You can come off mute and we can say a proper hello. And of course, let me know if you're planning to make and create with me. Perhaps leave a yes in the chat box if you're planning to make and create. And then it just gives me an idea of whether I'm going to be really no mates finishing my project on my own, or whether you are going to be able to join me. So probably a nice big welcome. So thank you to those of you who are coming back, who have been my loyal Zoomers over the past year and year plus. So thank you for your continued support for my flower classes. I was in two minds about running a class over the summer holidays, and then I thought, well, not everybody has children or grandchildren in school, so perhaps you're not bound by the summer holidays. And I thought, well, perhaps with the uncertainties about lockdown and vaccinations and getting back to normal, that the beauty of this kind of class is you can pick and choose whether you attend live or whether you watch the recording afterwards. So hopefully it's got a nice balance between you knowing you've got something to do on a Tuesday if you need to, but equally not putting yourself under pressure if you can't make it live. So we are set for a 10-week programme. And so that takes us into, I think, the first couple of weeks in September, and then we'll be thinking about Christmas time. So I will be asking you for your feedback on what you'd like me to do over the autumn and on the run up to Christmas. So I just want to check that you can see me okay and you can hear me okay. Could I have a wave? Yes, I'm getting a wave, thank you very much. So today's class is about making a herb wreath. So I'm sure that many of you who are watching who experience flower arranges will be able to make wreaths in your sleep. So part of this will be a recap for those that are watching on the recorded video. So I have got a tiny trick up my sleeve though, so don't turn off entirely, because I've got a slight change, something I read in one of my flower arranging magazines, and that gave me a really good idea to adapt the programme. So you know what I'm like, I give you all the information about what to bring to class, and then I throw in something extra to keep you on your toes. So for today's class, you can see here I have cut some herbs from my garden. Now, it doesn't matter if you haven't got herbs. You could do exactly the same wreath using greenery from your garden or fresh flowers from your garden. The only problem is they're not going to be in a water source, so they're going to die. So rather than have my door wreath or my welcome wreath die, I'm hoping that it's going to dry. And in theory, I can pick all my abundant crops from my garden and do something decorative with them, so I could use the herbs later on in the year. So I have got here lots of rosemary. That seems to be the one thing that grows really well in our garden. So rosemary. I've got some lemon balm, which is really lovely for making, like all of these, herbal tea. So put it into the teapot with some lovely water on the top, and it's quite a nice one as well. If you leave your herbal tea to go cold, it's quite nice drinking cold afterwards. I have got some feverfew. Now this always makes me laugh, feverfew, because we had some work done to our windows 2 or 3 summers ago, and I was in the middle of a major migraine, and the carpenter who came round said that he suffered from migraines as well, and he bought me a pot of feverfew. And the idea is that you should eat it every day. I couldn't face it, but put it in a Marmite sandwich, something really highly flavoured to disguise the awful taste of the feverfew, and you can prevent, your headaches getting a grip. But I thought perhaps the flowers, as they dry, also might make quite a nice tea. And then I've got some mint, so that's perfect for Pim's season. And this one's quite a crinkly, I think there's loads and loads of different varieties of mint. This one's got quite crinkly leaves. And then the old favourite is lavender. So I've got some fresh stems of lavender I've just packed from the garden, and I've also got some dried stems that I picked and have dried last year. So I'm giving them all a really good drink, in order that, knowing that they're going to dry out, they're going to sort of that I want them to dry rather than just die. So I've given them a good drink so that they're on a really good start in life. And then the last thing I've got is some marjoram, which I actually picked on a walk yesterday, Sunday. when I was taking the dog for a walk, and that was wild marjoram, which is also called, I think, is it the same as oregano? I think it's a herb that's got two names. That that'll be something for us to look up afterwards. So as well as that, I have got my floristry scissors. I have got some fabric scissors only because I thought I might make a ribbon and cut up an old muslin. So I have got piles and piles of muslin that make really good cloths. You know, the baby days are over. I'm thinking perhaps I might even dye some and use them as napkins. This one I thought I might cut up and make quite a rustic looking ribbon. So ribbons are a personal choice. So you don't need, if you haven't got a piece of fabric or you haven't got any ribbon, that doesn't matter. But what I have got is some of the bind wire, which is my absolute favourite. So it looks like string, but it's got the length of wire going through it. And if you don't have bind wire, you can use normal, ordinary string. Or if you've got your floristry wires, you could use those as well. But I wanted to do something that was quite practical, but decorative too. And then behind me, hanging up over here, I've got some basket cane. Now, don't drop down in fright when I say I've got basket cane. Those of you who were at class last time around would have seen that we made, we made the little simple basket. So it's just leftover basket cane, but you will need something flexible to make the base of your wreath. So this could be Virginia creeper stems, it could be clematis stems, it could be willow, weeping willow, it could be dogwood stems, and it could be wisteria, all those lovely supple branches. And if you feel that you can't get a nice robust circular shape, you could always put your twigs onto a base. So maybe a wreath base if you've got a metal wreath ring, or you can pull apart a dry cleaner's hanger and then manipulate it round into a circle. But you'll find that the more materials you add to your wreath base, the stronger it becomes, like everything that we have a go at. First of all, it looks really weak and it's very flimsy, but the more materials you add in, the firmer it will become. And then I think that's all for today's class. I'm going to hold back on my secret ingredient. I'm going to show you that a little bit later. But just a reminder for class next week, we're going to make little tied posies and wrap them up so that they will travel in the heat. So the idea being that if you are if you are able to go on holiday, perhaps you're going to visit family in another part of the country, or you've managed to get yourself a rental cottage, whatever. The thing about going on holidays is we miss our gardens in the best part of the year when they really, really are abundant. So whether you want to take a gift for yourself of a bit of your garden, making your holiday cottage a home from home, or whether you want to actually give a gift to your hostess, it's just a nice little way of wrapping up some flowers and making sure they don't die. So what you'll need next week, if you want to wrap your flowers, that you will need some cellophane. So I've got a wrap of cellophane here, and that's what I will be using. And then if you wanted to, that could give you a water source for your flowers. And then if you wanted to wrap them up more decoratively, whether you've got brown paper or sheet of wrapping paper, or you've got tissue paper, brown paper, your choice. So that's all that's needed for class next week. Bring flowers, bring greenery, and something to wrap. And if you don't fancy doing the wrapping bit, I will show you and demonstrate so that you'll be able to do that for yourself at another time. All right, then I'm going to move these out of the way. I'm going to lean across to get my my basket cane. So my cane, I must have bought it a couple of years ago. It comes in a circle like this, and I have actually soaked it. So if you're using fresh materials from the garden that are picked this year, you will have the natural suppleness to it. I have had to soak my cane because it's dried out, and that's what you do. You soak it for a couple of hours so that as you curl it around in your hand, it isn't going to snap. So that's what mine came like. And I have drawn off a couple of pieces. So what I'm going to do is push my chair back and show you how I'm going to make my wreath base, which will be a recap for those of you who have done this many times before. So I'm just going to scrape my chair back. And then, without flicking myself in the eye, get going. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't have these long straight bits, I will say I will be quite jealous of you if you do have lovely bits out of the garden, because you will have a wreath that looks homemade, it looks handcrafted, it's going to have lots of texture and interest. It's going to be very visually appealing. My cane is going to look, my little wreath base it's going to almost look as if I bought it from the shop, because it's going to be very round, very regular, without all those lovely characteristics that more natural materials from your garden would have had. So the first thing I do is I circle around in my hand. So I can do this quite easily because my materials are nice and flexible. And before you pick your materials, I would suggest that, before you go crazy and cutting everything down, just make sure you can bend it a little bit. So sometimes when you work round, you might have some stubby bits at the end that you might need to get rid of, and you might find you've got some very fine pieces at the other end. So it's probably the middle chunk you want, and the fine bits at the end are to be too fine, and the bits that were attached to the main bush, the tree, will be a bit woody possibly. But I wouldn't cut anything down until you've finished your wreath, and then you can always trim out any wayward bits. So I'm holding my piece of cane at the top like this, and then with the other end here, now so I've got quite long pieces, I'm holding the other end, and what I do from the underside is I'm stitching round, so just in and out like so. So I've gone all the way around. I'm still holding on to the beginning because I don't want it to unravel, and then I get to this bit, my end point, and I'm going to then change my hand position, and I'm going to hold that down there. Hopefully that's not going to come undone, and then start again. So I'm holding the bit that I ended with, and then I add in my new piece. So if you've got, look, this piece here is stupidly long, but if you've got shorter pieces, I imagine if you cut these from your garden, you've probably got pieces that are probably about 1 metre long, and you'll be doing lots and lots of joining, and you join it in exactly the same way. So you just sort of nestle it in your hand. If you've got you might be able to sort of thread it into the gap there, but it's not vitally important. But again, hold on to it and don't let go. Then take your other end and do exactly the same thing. So I might end up cutting this down a bit. I think I'm going to have to cut it. I could probably make it in one go if it was just me, but I think as I'm trying to film at the same time, it's not going to work. So all my materials there, and again, I could decide that perhaps I don't want to add any more in. So it's entirely up to you whether you go, how much you've got. You just want to get a nice base to start with, but it doesn't have to be chunky. So you can see there, I kind of wove that last bit in because it's poking out a little bit. Now, as I have cut these pieces, I'm going to add the next one in. So the same thing. I'm poking it through, just sort of finding a gap, holding tight onto it, and then going in and out. I'm not bothered about the wayward pieces at the moment, and I probably won't cut them off to the end because I need to have a think about which way up I want my wreath to be. So this pokey out bit here, if I smooth that down, perhaps as I go over the next time, I'll be able to catch that in a little bit. And the more pieces you add in, the stronger it becomes. And it may be that you might not have a perfect circle. And again, this is because I've got very uniform materials. It may be you might go a bit egg-shaped or a bit squished and squashed. It doesn't matter. So I wouldn't spend too long trying to get a perfect circle, but you can sort of manipulate it around a little bit if you do want to reshape it, as long as you're not too heavy-handed and end up crushing it. So that is the start of the wreath, and of course you could just hang that up and just tell everybody that you wanted to do a very pared back wreath. So it's not one of these projects you think, I have to do it, I have to do it, I have to do it. Do your wreath base in one session. If you get too hot, have a drink of water and come back and then do the decorating afterwards, and then make it something you can do for pleasure rather than being a massive chore that you feel just has to get done. So I'm going to show you now how I'm going to add my materials on. So I'm going to bring in the camera from the side and just shuffle around a little bit, and then we can have a view up over the top. So bear with me a moment. So here we are, the lovely base. And as I say, I'm not worried about these things pinging off at the moment. What I find is if you start cutting off the imperfections too quickly, you find that when you're working with your wreath, that actually by the time you finish, something else has pinged out. So I always save the trimming back till later. And it might be at this stage to have a think about, you know, does it look like your wreath base has got a top and a bottom? Mine's pretty similar all the way around, but if you've got one, you've got an egg shape, do you want to hang it from the point of your oval, or do you want to have it sideways on? So don't rush this bit, just sort of get to know the wreath that you've made and decide which way up is going to go. Now, you also need to think about how you're going to hang your wreath up. You know, do you have a hook on your door? Do you need to make a little loopy bit at the top here? And again, I'm going to say, don't add on your hanging mechanism just now, because depending what decorations you put on down here, you're going to shift the balance a little bit. So if you had enough herbs to go all the way around your wreath, the whole wreath would be nicely balanced. It would look balanced visually, but it would also be balanced in terms of how it's sat. I'm thinking that I might just do a sweep of herbs coming round the corner, you know, sort of a third of the way round. And you'll find then that the heaviness, if the herbs aren't particularly heavy, it'll be weighted to one side. So if you particularly want to hang it up, you'll need to put it on your door first of all to sort of see where the balance lies, and then I would put the loop or the hook on there. So just hang off a little bit and just see how it actually sits, because you don't want to make something that looks beautiful on the table, and then when you hang it up, it's sort of wanting to go a bit skew-iff because of the weighted section. So I've said I'm going to do some greenery here. Of course, you could do anything. You could have a semicircular greenery at the bottom, at the top. You could have an accent piece here. So it's your wreath and you are the designer. So making it, you know, as you want to make it. So I'm going to set that aside for a moment and then bring in my materials. So I've already got a bit of rosemary that escaped my pot. Lean across all the other bits and pieces. So I'm going to start with a bit of a production line, looking at all the materials I've got, and I'm going to group like with like. So I'm going to have individual bundles. I seem to have got bindweed on my lavender there. Individual bundles, because I think it's going to stand out a bit more, a bit of a modern take. But if you want to mix all your herbs together, you know, do what makes you happy. But I'm going to make little bundles of my greenery, my herbs, like with like. And then I'm going to take my paper covered wire, which I've got in a bit of a mess here. I think I might have to, always a danger when you just do a cut. So I like this because it looks like string, but it does the job of wire because it will hold in place. So if you haven't got this and you've only got bits of string, this will be a tiny bit fiddlier. And again, you might want to make sure you set aside enough time to do a good job without putting yourself under pressure. So I'm going to end up with one bunch of the lavender, I should say. The nice clean stems there. And all I'm doing is tying them up. And the way I do this with my bind wire is just wrap it round and then twist tie, but that's what's so easy about it. So the same thing with my rosemary here. And again, you're deciding how long you want each of the pieces to be. The bigger they are, the more they will occupy more space. So it means that you would get a much more luxurious effect if all your greenery is very long. The risk is it might flop around a little bit. And if you do it very short, well, if you want, you know, it's not going to fill out very much. So, you know, as a rule of thumb, I normally sort of do finger to thumb a little bit. And because I want to be able to bind these all together, I am going to get my clean stems at the bottom. So that helps me decide where to tie my greenery together. But also because I know that as the herbs will dry out, they will shrink a little bit. I need to make sure that this fastening is as tight as it can possibly be in order that my wreath, the little herbs don't start falling out on the floor. So that would be another bundle, so you can get yourself a nice little production line going. Let's just move this across the other side. I'm coming on to my mint yet. So the lavender had quite firm stems, woody stems on the rosemary. I've got a slightly softer stem, still quite robust. It makes a really good cut greenery mint for your flower arrangements. but I just have to be slightly careful. I'm not actually going to break it. And again, measuring up, I've got a nice shaped tip at the top there, but I don't want to lose the value of that, so I'm going to bundle that down together. So if I'm really careful, that one stem has given me, you know, a nice size bundle there. So taking it again, wrapping around, cutting and twisting like that. And then again, being slightly more delicate again, I'm going to get rid of the leaves, so I could put those in my Marmite sandwiches for my lunch, ward off that sunshine headache. And here I'm just going to take half of them, bind them up together. Cut and go. And then I'm just trimming them roughly down to the same length. So I will need to make lots and lots of bundles of these, and I will do that during the make and create session. The last thing here I've got is the lemon balm. It's got a lovely scent to it and does make a rather nice, refreshing cup of tea. So bundle those in my hand. So here with the paper covered wire, it's quite soft and gentle. So where my stems are softer, I'm able to group them together, but without crushing the stems. So I've got a lovely fragrant pile of leftovers here, which will probably end up on the kitchen floor. But I guess if you could save those bits, couldn't you? Your focaccia, have you made focaccia with a bit of the leftovers of rosemary, and perhaps I should share that recipe with you when I send off the recorded video, and you can make use of all your bits and bobs. So the next job is, how are we going to attach these on the stem? So I'm just going to demonstrate how to attach these 4 pieces, and then I will finish off later on. So I'm going to start off with my greenery. I've just got a little bit of dead wood in there. I'm just going to cut that off there. And what I can do here, where these spikes are, if I hold them down in my hand and try and push them back in, I could use that to start off my weaving. So I don't need to cut anything off. So what I'm doing here, again, I've got paper covered wire. I can just tie it on, and that gives me a firm base, and it means I've saved myself a job of cutting rid of that. So I want, because I'm going to do this accent area, I want to make sure my first piece is covering up that little bit of working. Everything needs to be quite invisible. So I'm laying that over the top. And again, if you've made door wreaths before, you'll recognize this technique here. I'm just binding and wrapping. So going over there until it's nice and firm. Now you'll see here, I'm not going to bind all the way down. So you don't want to be over. If you've got time, you could bind over and over. But I'm trying to find the, not necessarily the quickest, but the sturdiest way of doing it that's not time consuming. So once I know it's on there, I don't need to go over down to the end, because the next piece of the herb bunch I put in, I lay the bushy heads over these workings here. So that gets hidden, and you can see that if I went all the way down here, I would end up with my piece of string for binding on down here, when I actually wanted to bind it up there. So that's why I don't go too far. And I haven't either cut off the excess bits of string there. I'm just going to fold them in. If they bothered you, you can cut them off. But again, I don't want to be cutting things and then discovering I've accidentally cut through the tie. So being gentle here, because these are softer stems, getting that right balance between security without crushing everything. So laying that over the top there. And of course, you don't see the whole bunch of the rosemary because it's now got the lemon balm over the top. So that's another thing to consider as well. Do you put your next piece right on the top here, or do you walk it back a bit so you do see everything? So if you had loads and loads of herbs, I would say put everything quite close together so you get this real abundance. If you haven't got that much, I would sort of place it and then think, I'm just going to walk it that way a little bit, just so it spreads out over the edge. Because you could imagine I could have 5 bundles of herbs that fill this amount of space. if I stretch them out, I could go a bit further around the edge, but you don't want to put them so far round that you're seeing the fixings here. So sort of putting them up and then think I'll just shuffle them down a little bit. And here, as I wrap here, I'm just coming to the last of my rosemary stems. They do eventually get lashed in, but you don't want to be adding more than you really need to. And then I'm going to go with my mint next. Around here, the mint head is quite long. So if I wanted it to go like that, I would need to start wrapping here. So I do actually need to sort of travel my cord down a little bit. And now I've run out of the cord. So I'm going to cut myself a long piece of string again. So normally I wouldn't cut the string off because you never know how much you're going to use. The reason I cut my binding wire off the reel is because I got it in a muddle. But it's easy enough to twist, tie it back into position. And it's also, if you were using string, you could just knot it again and tie on, but it would be easier if you kept it all on the reel, I think. And here, this bit of cane sticking out again, I could just tuck that in and bind that in, so that means I don't have to chop bits there. Now this is smelling absolutely gorgeous, really, really lovely. So that's nice and secure. And then perhaps my little stems at the end here with the lavender there. So holding my lavender up, these are a bit skinny compared to everything else. And it's showing off the bit of the binding there, but I cover that up. This is where if you do put a ribbon on it, it is your friend because it will cover up the end points. If you are just doing an accent area, you're always going to end up with something that shows at the bottom. So here, as I wrap round, I'm putting my wrapping slightly closer together, just to sort of make it look like an intended finish point. And then round the back, I'm going to loop that through and just tie it off and tuck it out of the way. There's my scissors to push that down and out of the way. So it looks a tiny bit messy here. So what I'm going to do is actually undo that last bit that bundled the lavender together, because it's already attached now with the joint binding. Trim off that excess bit of string from the previous bundle, and then I could trim the lavender just for decorative effect. So I'm imagining I'm going to put my little bow here, my ribbon, but it's quite nice having the stems come out at the end. So it's entirely up to you whether you want to have the stems on for decorative effect or whether you want to have them hidden. So there's choices to be made at every turn. So let's get on. I'm going to go for a ribbon, a bow. And again, this might not be your style. You might want to go for just a knot detail at the top, and that's quite trendy at the moment, a knotted detail with quite long trails. So I'm going to sort of do a hybrid of the two of them. So I would take my muslin cloth, which has got a seamed edge to it all. So I'm going to be really brave and do a slice here and then rip. I'm imagining it's almost like those very fashionable hand-dyed silk ribbons that got the natural frayed edge. So again, you could cut this all the way along if that was your style. But I do think that with the sort of the homemade effect of the wreath, I don't want it to be all neaty neat. I want it to be separate. And what I've done there is cut off the binding at the end there. So I'm going to rip myself two of these, what I'm going to call ribbons. And I will cut off the binding there as well. So that's number one. And then number two, the same width. And pull. So it can't go all the way through because it's got the hemmed edge at the end. Get rid of that. And that. So I've got my two frayed looking ribbons. And as I say, if the frayed look isn't your look, you can skip this bit or use a conventional satin ribbon. And if you don't like bows, you could just tie this on the end here in a very casual style, just to finish off the wreath a little bit and cover over that binding at the end. So I'm going to make a very simple ribbon, a bow I should say, and it's the bow effect where you tie it but with 2 pieces of fabric. So I'm taking my fabric, letting it lie flat and then crossing it over the top here. So it looks a little bit like, is that the sign for breast cancer research? Or a little fish, I always think about it. So I'm probably making that more complicated than it should be. Resting it in my hand and crossing over these pieces here, like that. And then you hold the cross section and let that fall back onto the loop there. So you can see when I put it on the table that it's made a very strange looking bow. So I'm going to tie my next piece of ribbon across there to finish off. And what I'm going to do here before I tie it is make a knot in this one, quite a loose knot, just to give myself a little bit of texture, a bit of interest at the front of my ribbon. It does rather look like I'm making a ribbon out of bandages. Putting that over the top of that cross point and then flicking it over and tying that in a knot at the back, and that will hold the ribbon so nice and tight. So I've got my 2 loops, my tails, and then there's knotted section at the bottom. And of course, the longer your piece of fabric, you could go for really, really long tails. And then I will put that on the end there, very gently turn it over because I don't want to crush my herbs, and to tie that in place like that. And you could do a double knot if you wanted to. So you get this very sort of natural, an alternative really to a Hessian ribbon or a piece of raffia, something like that. It's just a very natural looking bow effect on there. And of course, if you don't like it, miss that bit out. So there's lots of adjusting and doing things like that. So I would probably cut away, tie a double knot and cut the ties away and just have the 2 ties down here, the 2 legs of the ribbon down here, and perhaps even make them slightly longer, little stitch, and just make those bits longer at the end. And then at this stage, I would hold it in my hand and decide where the weight was. So it's going to sort of spin that way. And then I would put my little pie point at the top here. So I would then, because everything is quite natural, I don't use the fabric scissors for that, I would take a little bit of my brown string and flick it underneath one of those, the binding point, and tighten a knot like that. So it looks, neat and purposeful. But it's got, a function, but it's quite decorative as well. So your eye isn't really drawn to that because it's just a nice, neat and discreet. And then, of course, now I can see what I need to chop off. So I've cut the ends off there, and I've cut a slant rather than having sort of a square truncated end, so that they blend seamlessly into the wreath. So that would be a classic wreath, and probably what I'll do on the Make and Create session afterwards, I've got loads more herbs, I'll probably take the ribbon off here and I'll do a little bit more work, and but keeping it in the very distinct bundles, like with like. Now, what about a different way of making the wreath? So as I say, I know loads of you watching that you've used this technique before. So I have got a little adjustment up my sleeve for you. So here I have made earlier another wreath base. You can see it's got a little bit of a spring out there. And off to the side, now I know that you always have a little bit of a joke with me that I always put something into the class that I haven't told you about. Well, I haven't told you about this for class today, but this is air drying clay. So this is something we're going to be using in a future class. So if you have all your materials up front, you may have this in your stash. But if not, I thought I'd just show you a different way of adding your materials in. So this is like playing with Play-Doh or plasticine. and it's slightly messy on your hands. So I'm taking it out of the bag. It's air drying clay, so you do need to make sure you seal up what you don't use. So not only put, pack it down and put the tab back on, but I also put mine in a Ziploc bag as well. So I've got a piece of this air drying clay, and I'm going to open up the weave of my wreath. I might just do a tiny bit less. I don't think I need that much actually. So that's probably the size of a large marble. And I'm going to squish that into my wreath base, and then use that as my flower arranging medium. So if you have made tons and tons of door wreaths, this might be a good way of practicing a slightly different technique. So here, I can put materials in. So I'm doing exactly as we would if we were doing a flower arrangement. Actually, I'm going to change my mind there. It's too bushy. I'm going to have a single piece. So clean end of the stem, pushing it into the material. Now this clay will take up to, well, perhaps in this hot weather, perhaps only 24 hours to dry. I'm going to go for a diagonal across there. So you can be slightly more playful and more artful with what we've got here, and doing it as you would do, or perhaps if you've ever made a long and low flower arrangement, thinking about your outside edges and then coming into the middle with a raised section, and you'll be able to get all your herbs in there, but it will just look slightly more Instagram ready, like that. And that's what's holding it in place. So whereas we have to think about covering our flower foam when we use that as our medium, we'll need to make sure that I've covered my air drying clay, but this clay is white, so it's not massively, it doesn't show up against the pale of my my basket cane. And of course, if I'm neat with it, it doesn't matter if I get a glimpse of it. So you can start building up as you would what conventional flower arrangement. Again, I've got little dry bits now. I want it to look as perfect as possible. So cutting out any of the dry bits. So it is slightly dirty on the hands, is the only thing I would say, but nothing that a good wash won't help you with. It's a little bit too long, that piece there. And with everything, you will need to give it the waggle. But just being careful, because of course this is air dry clay. It will hold, stop me too, if it falls out now, you need to either make the stem slightly shorter, or you need to squish your air drying clay up a little bit. And then let's practice. We're in a workshop session. It doesn't have to be perfect. If it goes wrong today, we'll learn how to do it better tomorrow. Let's see whether I can put a little bit of flower in it. So my very, very dainty feverfew stems here. And perhaps some of those little tips of the mint for a nice sort of textural contrast, and then just build it up and have fun with the technique. So this is a bit like the mint, is a bit like putting in chrysanthemum stems. Sometimes they're a little bit, although they're soft, they sort of snap back very, very quickly. So you will need to be dainty with that. So that's just another technique for you to think about, for those of you who are more experienced with your flower arranging. So what I'm going to do now is bring the camera back to my face, and I shall hold these up so you can have a really good look at them. Hey, I'm back in the room. So it's that's the first wreath that I made. So I think as a preference, I would rather my tails were slightly longer. But you can see how distinctive, by bundling the materials together like with light, it just gives it a really quite a crisp little look. I am conscious that all I'm thinking of is crepe bandages when I see this, so I might have to think about that, or see with my fabric stash I've got perhaps a pale green colour or something like that. But I wanted to show you the bow technique here by using that knot in the tie section. So I hope that was nice and clear. And if it wasn't clear, let me know when I've finished the recording, or let me know on the chat there, and I might do a picture tutorial just to show you that in a slightly clearer way. So I did put a tie on that. So, you know, is it going to hang up straight? Not bad, not bad. So you will need to, I think with where you've got not much, where you haven't got many materials and the herbs are quite lightweight, perhaps it won't get unbalanced, but you can imagine if you had very heavy greenery, perhaps if you're thinking of using this technique at Christmas time, and sometimes you put the hanger in first and then everything sort of weights around like that, the heaviness is at the bottom, and then you need to move your hanger back around. So that's why I say don't put the hanger on to the end until you can feel how it's actually sitting in your hand. And then this one, I rather like the sort of the more delicate quality of that, and just the thought of using, it's not a new medium, but just using something in a slightly different way, but it does give you a really lightweight effect, and that's quite fashionable at the moment. You'll see lots of hoops if you're a Pinterest or an Instagram fan, with just a little bit of detailing at the bottom. So we've taken the herb wreath and just updated it for the modern day. So I'll turn it around the other way. It's not quite so pretty the other way. And like all these mechanics, I think probably I've used too much of the clay. So again, during the Make and Create session, I will probably, as it's not an instant dry, there's a bit of clay there, I may well take it apart and put a slightly smaller amount of the clay in there, so I'm not having to cover it up. But I think you can see, even though it's quite gappy from there, when you hold it from a distance, when you've got that on your front door, whether you're hanging it on the cupboard door, you can see that it's not obvious. It's not like when you use the flower foam, when you've got a great big lump of green there, that it's faded slightly into distance. So that brings us to the end of today's session. So what I'm going to do now is say goodbye to those ladies who are watching on the record, and to remind you as well, don't forget to share your photographs in the Facebook group Flower Start World. And if you're on Instagram, you can tag me at at Flower Start with an underscore at the end, and use the hashtag Flower Start. So I shall say goodbye for now. I think it's probably time for a nice cold glass of water, and I'll see you next week for the little Tide Posy as your hostess gift, or the gift to yourself for taking a little bit of your garden away on holiday with you. So I'll see you next week.